Chapter 7. The Secret. The wind found every gap in my layers. Turning into the alley behind O'Malley's Tavern was like stepping into a wind tunnel designed by winter itself. It howled softly between the tall brick buildings, carrying the acrid smell of cold, damp decay mixed with the cloying sweetness of stale beer from the bar's dumpsters and, further off, the ghost of fryer oil on the night air. Streetlights at either end cast weak, sallow pools of light that barely penetrated the deep shadows, making the familiar act of walking feel treacherous. Patches of old ice, gray and hard as granite, clung stubbornly near drain pipes, and in the lowest depressions of the cracked pavement, remnants of a thaw-freeze cycle. I pulled my wool scarf tighter, feeling the rough texture against my chin, burying my nose in its warmth, my gloved hands shoved deep into the pockets of my puffy coat. Waiting here felt unnerving, far more exposed than hiding in plain sight within the familiar, echoing corridors of the Academy Theatre after hours. But the risks there had grown too tangible lately. Madame Farrell's uncanny sixth sense for detecting anything out of the ordinary. Volkov's unpredictable late-night rehearsals, the whispers of tighter security checks. Even the sympathetic night custodian couldn't guarantee privacy anymore. And Veronica Bellwether, with her sharp eyes and sharper ambition, always seemed to be lurking, searching for any leverage, any sign of weakness in her rivals. We needed a new sanctuary, however temporary, however imperfect. Gwen's offer had felt like a lifeline, though the fact that she was part of this precarious secret sent a complicated pang through me. Sweet, earnest Gwen, the company's darling. How had she gotten pulled into this? I remembered her quiet approach weeks ago, her hesitant questions about needing money, her anxiety, unseen beneath the relentless niceness everyone expected. When our usual late-night rehearsal room haunt became too risky, it was Gwen who'd suggested her brother Owen's workplace. Her expression, a mixture of nervousness and defiant resolve. He handles deliveries sometimes, early or late at O'Malley's, she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. He grumbles constantly, Elena, seriously, about everything. But he's fiercely loyal. I bet he'd let us use the basement if I asked. He complains, but he always comes through for me. She hadn't needed to explain why she wanted in on whatever we were doing. I saw the flicker of desperation in her eyes. And Owen had, apparently, come through. But relying on him still felt like walking on thinner ice than the patches gleaming darkly underfoot. His loyalty was to Gwen, yes. But he was still an outsider to the specifics of Nocturne, to the full extent of the risks we courted. Yet, what choice did we have? The gratitude I felt towards Gwen for securing this space was immense, tangled now with a protective anxiety for her involvement. The weight of Giselle, the looming pressure of embodying that iconic role, felt strangely distant right now, eclipsed by the immediate, practical concerns of orchestrating this clandestine meeting, ensuring everyone arrived unseen, managing the logistics of our double lives. My own reasons for being part of this felt sharper in the cold air too. The need to take care of Abola, a need rooted in half-understood stories of her arrival here, decades ago, sacrifices made then demanding recompense now. The irony wasn't lost on me, dancing in the shadows of Nocturne to provide light and comfort for her sunset years, while others sought different kinds of light or shadow there. A flicker of movement near the overflowing dumpster at the far end of the alley snapped me back to the present. Mei Chen materialized, a small dark figure against the grimy brickwork. She wore a long, practical coat, her face obscured by a knitted hat pulled low. A quick, almost imperceptible dip of her head acknowledged my presence, before she retreated deeper into the shadows, becoming just another patch of darkness. Minutes later, Tomi Ivanov appeared at the street entrance, her usual sharp, observant energy palpable even in her silhouette. She scanned the alley, left, right, up, a quick professional assessment before spotting May and me. A curt nod, and she found her own shadowed alcove across from me, leaning back against the cold brick, patient but alert. One by one, the others materialized, drawn from the surrounding city darkness like moths to this unlikely, hidden flame. Ashlyn, her shoulders slumped slightly with fatigue, even under her puffy coat. Lily, moving with brisk determination, checking her watch as she found a spot. Talia, gliding almost silently into position, her usual quiet grace imbued with an extra layer of caution. Then Edith Petrov, emerging from a side street, head down, hidden beneath an expensive parka hood, clearly seeking the obscurity this rundown alley offered, a stark contrast to the spotlight her family name usually attracted. Poppy followed, seeming almost to drift, her wide eyes reflecting the dim streetlight in a way that made her look both present and elsewhere, perhaps already anticipating the release Nocturne offered from Madame Evangeline's suffocating oversight. Jean Miller arrived next, practical as ever, giving a quick thumbs up before leaning against the wall near Tommy. Then came Celeste, her arrival quiet, almost meditative. Even bundled in layers, she possessed an innate grace, her dark eyes observant, taking in the gritty alley scene with a sensitive intensity. She wasn't here for money. Celeste sought resonance, perhaps? A way to feel the world's rough edges, to fuel the deep, artistic wellspring within her. Something the polished perfection of Veridian couldn't provide. She gave me a small, understanding smile before finding her own quiet space. Almost immediately after, Dylan appeared, emerging suddenly from the deeper shadows near the bar's entrance, as if she'd been there all along. Her energy was different. Coiled, watchful, a fierce intensity barely contained beneath her dark, functional layers. She represented something untamed. Like the North Atlantic she sometimes spoke of, dancing at Nocturne not for cash, but perhaps for connection. For a rawness that mirrored her own powerful style, a world away from Veridian's constraints. She nodded curtly towards me, her gaze sweeping over the alley before she leaned against the wall, separate but present. Finally, Gwen herself slipped in, looking smaller, younger than she did in the studio, pulling her hat down further, as if trying to physically diminish the sweetheart persona. She offered a quick, nervous smile towards me, a silent question. Okay? Before joining the others huddled against the cold brick. 12. Our strange, secret sisterhood. Complete. Huddled in the freezing January wind, united by a dangerous secret, waiting for a grumpy bartender to grant us passage. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the moan of the wind funneling between the buildings and the distant rumble of a late-night bus. My fingers were starting to go numb inside my gloves. I stamped my feet lightly, the small sound echoing unnervingly in the confined space. Beside me, I saw Ashlyn shiver violently, burying her face deeper into her scarf. The romance of clandestine meetings faded quickly when faced with the reality of single-digit temperatures and frozen toes. Just as the waiting began to feel unbearable, a piercing squeal cut through the night as the heavy steel back door to O'Malley's groaned open. Weak yellow light spilled out, illuminating swirling dust motes and the rough texture of the alley wall. A large figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the light from within. Owen. Even in shadow, his posture radiated impatience. He wore a dark, stained work apron over a thick flannel shirt, his arms crossed formidably over his chest. He didn't waste time on greetings. He just jerked his head, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that barely carried over the wind but was clearly meant to be obeyed. All right, get in before someone sees you lot lurking out here like alley cats. Looks dodgy as hell. He stepped aside just enough for us to pass. And keep it down in there. Sound carries back here more than you think. He sounded thoroughly put upon, as Gwen had predicted, but there was no real heat behind it. More a habitual crustiness. He was doing his sister a favor, and that was that. He likely neither knew nor cared why a dozen young women needed to huddle in his bar's basement on a freezing night. I murmured a quick, "Thanks, Owen," as I squeezed past him, catching a whiff of stale beer, fried food, and strong disinfectant. The others followed silently, quickly, shedding the biting wind for the dubious shelter of the bar's back service hallway. It wasn't much warmer in here, but at least the wind was gone. Owen pulled the heavy door shut, the click of the deadbolt echoing unnervingly loud. He didn't linger, just pointed towards a narrow, steep flight of wooden stairs at the end of the short, cluttered hall. Mops leaned against the wall next to precarious stacks of flattened liquor boxes and industrial-sized tubs of cleaning supplies. "Basement's clear," he stated, already turning back towards the main bar area. "Nobody goes down there tonight, except maybe me later if a keg blows. Got an hour, maybe 90 minutes tops before Jerry from produce might show up early for delivery. He sometimes does. He shot a final, stern look over his shoulder. Don't touch anything that looks expensive, don't make a mess, and be ready to clear out fast when I give the signal. He didn't wait for acknowledgement, just disappeared through another door, leaving us alone at the precipice. I exchanged a quick glance with May, then with Tommy. A shared breath. Then I turned and started down the stairs, gripping the dusty metal pipe that served as a makeshift handrail. The wooden treads creaked ominously under my weight. The air grew cooler as we descended, damper, carrying the subterranean smells of earth, aging concrete, sluggish drains, and something else. A faint, sweetish aroma like long-spilled liquor. It was a stark contrast to the rosin and perfume of the academy. The stairs opened into a low-ceilinged space, dimly lit by a couple of bare, fly-specked bulbs dangling from the ceiling, amidst a tangle of exposed pipes and electrical conduits. Shadows clung thickly in the corners and pooled around the clutter that filled the room. Heavy silver kegs lined one wall. Boxes marked liquor inventory, holiday decorations, do not open, and spare glassware were stacked high, some looking perilously unstable. Older, unwanted furniture. I recognized a ripped vinyl booth seat from the upstairs pub, a wobbly-looking table missing a leg, were draped in gray, dusty cloths, like sleeping subterranean beasts. The floor was rough, uneven concrete, stained with spills from years past. One by one, the 12 of Glurs emerged from the staircase, blinking in the dim light, taking in the strange, cramped surroundings. We automatically drew closer together in the small, relatively clear space near the stairs, a huddle of dancers accustomed to soaring spaces now confined underground. The air felt heavy, still. It wasn't the studio, wasn't the stage, wasn't even the familiar risk of the academy after hours. This was different. Grittier. More hidden. But perhaps, paradoxically, safer for tonight. I took a deep breath, pushing away the slight claustrophobia, the lingering chill, the strangeness of it all. Owen's grumpy, reliable assistance had gotten us here. Now it was time to focus. Time to manage the intricate, dangerous choreography of our secret lives. We stood there for a moment, in the damp chill of Owen's basement, 12 dancers accustomed to sprung floors and mirrored walls, now huddled amidst stacked kegs and dusty relics of O'Malley's past. The single bare bulb overhead cast harsh shadows, making us look like conspirators in some low-budget spy film. The air smelled earthy and cool, tinged with the faint metallic scent of the pipes snaking across the low ceiling, and the ghostly sweetness of stale beer. I saw May pull her coat tighter around herself, while Tommy, ever practical, perched on an overturned plastic crate as if claiming territory. The initial awkwardness of the strange surroundings began to fade, replaced by the familiar weight of our shared purpose. It didn't matter if we were in a decaying dance studio or a subterranean storage room, the business of Nocturne demanded attention. All right. I pitched my voice low, but clear enough to cut through the basement's stillness. Let's get started. Priority is finalizing the Nocturne schedule for the next 2 weeks. I've drafted something based on everyone's availability requests, but we need to lock it down tonight. Pull up the shared calendar if you have service down here. A few phones immediately came out, screens glowing dimly in the subterranean light. Service was patchy, as expected. Jean, already anticipating this, had downloaded the relevant company schedules earlier and quickly brought up the Veridian rehearsal calendar on her phone, angling the screen so Talia could see. Okay, I began, looking at my own notes scribbled on a folded piece of paper I'd pulled from my coat pocket. First potential conflict. Talia. Madame Farrell called a mandatory Giselle Act 2, costume fitting for all Wireless next Thursday afternoon, potentially running late. You're scheduled for the early shift at Nocturne that night. Talia sighed softly, her brow furrowing. Running late could mean anything with Farrell. If it goes past 6, it probably will, Jean interjected, scrolling through the official Veridian calendar on her phone. But look, there's a block right after, marked admin/company meeting prep until 7:30. Vague. If your fitting does run late, say until 6:30, you could plausibly be catching up on vital communications, or reviewing choreography notes in the library until 7:15 before heading out. It gives you a buffer. Just make sure Farrell sees you looking busy after the fitting, not just bolting. Jean's knack for navigating company bureaucracy with plausible deniability was invaluable. Talia nodded slowly, considering it. Okay, I can make that work. Risky if Farrell comes looking, but... She trailed off. We all understood the but. The money was necessary. Next, I continued, turning my attention to Tommy. You mentioned a near miss last week. Seeing someone near the back entrance? Tommy's usual sharp energy seemed amplified by nervous energy now. Yeah, Wednesday night, leaving after the late shift, maybe 1:30 a.m.? I saw one of the newer board members, Alexander something, the one who asks too many questions about outreach programs. We nodded. Alex was known for his genuine interest, but also his tendency to show up at odd hours. He was just standing across the street from Nocturne's service alley exit, under a streetlight, looking. A collective intake of breath seemed to echo in the small space. Did he see you? Ashlyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't think so, Tommy said, rubbing her arms as if suddenly colder. I ducked back into the alleyway fast, waited maybe 10 minutes, then took the long way around through the park to the subway. But it felt weird. Like he was watching the club itself. Okay, I said, making a note. New rule. No one leaves alone via the service alley after midnight for the next few weeks. Minimum. Use the main side exit, even though it's further, and leave in pairs if possible. And vary your routes home. We can't risk a board member seeing us leaving a place like Nocturne at 2 a.m. I looked around the group. Agreed. Murmurs of assent. Jean quickly started sketching potential alternate routes on her phone map, screen sharing it with Tommy and Lily. The air felt tighter now, the risk more immediate. My gaze fell on Ashlyn, huddled on an old wooden crate, looking utterly exhausted. Her skin seemed almost translucent under the harsh bulb light. Ashlyn, I said gently, you flagged concerns about fatigue, especially with Giselle core work intensifying. She looked up, dark circles stark under her eyes. I don't know if I can keep up this pace, Elena, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Last week, I almost missed a cue in rehearsal, because I was so tired from the Wednesday late shift, Volkov noticed. Another collective wince. Drawing Volkov's negative attention was dangerous. I need the money, you know I do, but I'm scared I'll burn out completely or get injured. A wave of sympathy washed through the group. Lily, ever practical, leaned forward. Are you taking supplements? The high-dose B complex with iron helps me when the schedule gets brutal. And electrolytes. May, sitting beside Ashlyn, quietly nudged her own unopened water bottle towards her. Drink, she murmured. And maybe I can take one of your early shifts next week. I have that Tuesday afternoon free. Ashlyn looked between them, her eyes welling up slightly. Thanks, May. Lily, I'll try the vitamins. The quiet offer, the practical suggestion. It was how we survived, propping each other up in the face of impossible demands. But Ashlyn's fatigue was a warning sign for all of us. Which brings us to transport, Lily said, picking up the thread smoothly, ever focused on logistics. Especially now. She gestured vaguely upwards, indicating the world beyond the basement. The forecast calls for potential freezing rain later next week. Late-night buses become unreliable, and waiting on an icy platform at 2 a.m. isn't just miserable, it's unsafe. We need to be smarter about getting home. The discussion turned to ride shares, splitting costs, reliable services, versus cheaper, sketchier options. Gwen piped up. My brother Adam drives for that indie service, Night Owl. Mostly cash, less traceable than the big apps. He works late, knows the city like the back of his hand. Might be safer, more discreet, if we pool for it on really bad nights. We agreed to create a shared digital fund for emergency late-night rides, accessible to everyone, and to make checking the hourly weather forecast a mandatory pre-nocturne ritual. Safety first, always. My attention shifted to Poppy. She'd been quiet throughout the discussion, tracing patterns in the dust on a nearby keg with one slender finger, her expression distant. Poppy? I prompted gently. Your availability for next weekend looked tentative. Is everything all right? She started slightly, her wide eyes focusing on me. Oh, yes, fine. She gave a quick, unconvincing smile. It's just Madame Evangeline has been more attentive lately. She didn't elaborate, but we all understood the subtext. Her former mentor, Madame Evangeline, still exerted an almost suffocating control over Poppy's life, monitoring her schedule, her associations, her diet. Edith, sitting near her, spoke up quietly, her voice devoid of its usual brittle edge. I can take your Saturday shift, Poppy. I could use the distraction, honestly. Poppy looked at Edith with unguarded gratitude, nodding silently. Another crisis averted, another shift covered, the complex web adjusting itself. I leaned back against the cool, damp, concrete wall, listening to the low murmur of continued scheduling adjustments, feeling the familiar weight settle on me. Managing 12 dancers' clandestine work schedules on top of Veridian's punishing demands was like conducting a silent, high-stakes orchestra. Every player had their part, their needs, their vulnerabilities. My role was to keep the harmony, prevent disastrous clashes, maintain the rhythm of secrecy. Was relying on Owen and this basement sustainable? Probably not long-term. Jerry, the produce guy, an early morning cleaning crew, even Owen getting sick one night. Any number of small things could expose us. Plan C? We didn't really have one yet. Using different dancers' apartments was too risky. Traceable. We were operating without a net. The thought made the basement air feel even colder. Ashland's burnout, Poppy's precarious situation, Tommy's close call with Alex on the board, the threads felt like they could unravel at any moment. And through it all, the constant, gnawing pressure of Giselle. Demanding perfection. Demanding emotional depth. I felt too drained and distracted to access right now. I closed my eyes briefly, focusing on the immediate task. Finalize the schedule. Ensure everyone felt heard, supported, safe, at least for the next 2 weeks. One performance at a time, one shift at a time, one secret meeting at a time. That was the only way to manage it. I opened my eyes, scanned the faces dimly lit by the bare bulb, faces of exhaustion, determination, anxiety, and fragile hope, and prepared to confirm the final assignments. A fragile sense of order settled over our small group in the dim, damp basement. The schedule for the next 2 weeks at Nocturne was mapped out, potential crises addressed, contingency plans roughed into shape on glowing phone screens that cast our faces in sharp, unnatural relief against the surrounding shadows. Keg stood silent witness. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering down the stairwell. For a moment, there was only the sound of our collective breathing and the low hum of the ancient boiler, somewhere deeper in the building's guts. Then Jean, ever the pragmatist, voiced the question that hung unspoken in the chilly air. She leaned forward from her perch on a stack of flattened cardboard boxes, her expression stripped of its usual resourcefulness, replaced by a stark weariness. Okay, she said, her voice quiet but resonant in the enclosed space. We have a plan for the next 2 weeks. But realistically, how long can we actually keep this up? All of it? She gestured vaguely, encompassing the late nights, the physical toll, the secrecy, the constant nerve-shredding risk. Something's got to give eventually, right? Her question landed like a stone, sinking into the fragile quiet. No one answered immediately. Eyes darted around, meeting briefly before skittering away. The air thickened, charged now not just with cold and damp, but with the weight of 12 individual burdens, 12 carefully guarded reasons for being involved in this dangerous double life. It was Mei Chen who broke the silence, her voice soft but carrying an unexpected firmness. She looked directly at Jean, then her gaze swept across the rest of us, identified by need. For some of us, she stated simply, giving up isn't an option. My family relies on this income. Since he got sick, she corrected herself quickly, the brief hesitation hinting at deeper troubles. Nocturne covers his medical bills, the ones insurance doesn't touch. There is no giving up. The finality in her tone was absolute chilling. Tomi Ivanov scoffed, a harsh sound in the quiet. Give up? And go back to begging Volkov for corrections he reserves for his pets? No thanks. Her eyes flashed with familiar fire. Nocturne pays for the private coaching sessions. The ones Volkov would throw a fit over if he knew. The ones that might actually teach me the artistry I need to get noticed for something other than my jump. She kicked lightly at a loose pebble on the concrete floor. It pays for decent point shoes sometimes too, ironically enough, when the company supply is garbage. Ashlyn sighed, hugging her knees tighter to her chest. It's this, or quit dancing altogether, she murmured, her voice raspy with fatigue. My paycheck barely covers rent. Without Nocturne, I couldn't afford point shoes, period, let alone extra coaching or physical therapy when insurance runs out. There's no family money to fall back on. It's just this. The resignation in her voice was heartbreaking. Lily nodded, her expression grimly determined. Stability, she said, the word precise, clipped. My younger brother starts college next year. This ensures his deposit is covered, that I can cover my rent without panicking every month. It's the difference between breathing and drowning. Talia, usually so serene, spoke with a quiet intensity that made everyone listen. Necessity, she stated, her gaze steady. Plain and simple. My cousins, we help each other. Always have. There are mouths to feed. Unexpected crises back home. This provides the buffer. It lets me send money without sacrificing everything here. Jean, who had posed the initial question, nodded slowly, acknowledging their points. Fair enough, she conceded, her practical nature reasserting itself. For me, it covers the outrageous student loan payments from my master's degree, the one I thought would give me options besides dancing eventually. Seems I just acquired more debt. She gave a wry, self-deprecating smile. So yes, we keep going. Listening to them, surrounded by the damp concrete and dusty boxes, the raw, unvarnished truths of their financial struggles felt starker, more immediate than ever before. My own motivation resonated deeply with theirs. Abuela's increasing frailty, the hardships she'd endured immigrating here decades ago, the debt had to be paid, quitting wasn't optional. I didn't want to imagine what would happen if I didn't pay, even if it meant dancing under alias in the smoky, colored lights of Nocturne. The weight of necessity settled heavily amongst us. May, Tommy, Ashlyn, Lily, Talia, Jean, Gwen, and myself. 8 dancers, bound not just by artistry, but by the cold, hard arithmetic of survival. Then Edith Petrov spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, yet cutting through the heavy atmosphere. And for some of us, she said, looking not at us, but at her own hands twisting in the lap of her expensive parka, it's not about the money. She finally looked up, her usually composed features surprisingly vulnerable in the dim light. It's about breathing, about being someone else, anyone else. Just for a few hours. She swallowed hard. At Nocturne, I'm not Edith Petrov, the third-generation Veridian principal, daughter of the chairman of the board. I'm not carrying the weight of the family name, the patron's expectations, Volkov's critiques echoing my grandfather's. I'm just a body moving, anonymous in the dark. And sometimes, her voice cracked, almost imperceptibly, that anonymity feels more valuable than anything money could buy. Poppy nodded, her ethereal quality sharpening into something fiercely present. It's control, she stated, her voice surprisingly strong. Madame Evangeline, she tries to script my every waking moment. What I eat, who I see, how I practice, even how I feel about the music. Her hands clenched briefly. At Nocturne, I choose the movement. I choose the music in my head. For those hours, my body, my time, they belong only to me. It's the only place. The implications of Evangeline's control, perhaps hinted at by Poppy's earlier vagueness about scheduling, felt suddenly more sinister. Celeste chimed in, her voice tight with nervous energy. And sometimes it's just alive, she burst out, almost defensively. Veridian is so controlled, perfect, silent, except for the piano and corrections. Nocturne is loud, messy, unpredictable. There's risk, adrenaline. It makes you feel something real. Her words hung in the air, highlighting the other side of the coin. Escape, anonymity, control, rebellion, sheer aliveness. For Edith, Poppy, Celeste, and Dylan, drawn to Nocturne, not by empty pockets, but by other kinds of emptiness, It served a different, perhaps equally desperate, need. Down here, in the damp, cool shadows of the basement, their craving for freedom felt less like frivolous thrill-seeking and more like a necessary counterpoint to the often suffocating discipline of our chosen profession. The rigid structure, the constant scrutiny, the demand for perfection, perhaps it did necessitate an escape valve, however risky. My own path was driven by obligation, but I couldn't deny understanding their yearning, even as I worried about the recklessness it might invite. The potential for self-destruction felt closer, more tangible, for those dancing purely for the escape. Tommy shifted on her crate, her expression skeptical as she looked at Celeste. Alive? Or stupid? She muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Taking risks down there for kicks is one thing when you've got family money to bail you out if you screw up, Edith, she added, her gaze flicking towards Edith, though her tone wasn't accusatory, just blunt. For the rest of us, getting caught doesn't just mean trouble with Volkov. It means losing everything. A tense silence followed Tommy's words. The divide between the two groups, usually unspoken, was suddenly laid bare. Edith flushed slightly but didn't retort. The younger soloist looked chastened. May spoke quietly into the silence, her voice calm, mediating. The risks are the same for all of us, Tommy. Discovery would harm everyone, regardless of their reasons for being there. She looked around the group, her gaze encompassing both factions. Which is why we must be careful, more careful than ever. She's right, I affirmed, stepping forward slightly. Motivation doesn't matter if we get caught. We protect the secret. We protect each other. Period. I let my gaze linger on each face. That means no carelessness, no unnecessary risks, inside Nocturne or out. And it especially means watching out for anyone who might be watching us. My thoughts immediately went to Veronica Bellwether. Veronica, I said, voicing the name like a shared curse. Her Giselle variation was technically brilliant yesterday, but she spends more time watching the rest of us than focusing on her own work. She lives for gossip, for any perceived weakness she can exploit. If she suspected anything about Nocturne, she'd go straight to Volkov or Armand. Lily finished grimly. Or worse, leak it to the patrons. Exactly, I confirmed. So, absolute discretion. No talk about Nocturne at the Academy, not even coded references. Check your surroundings constantly. Be smart. The shared fear of exposure, particularly from a rival like Veronica, seemed to momentarily bridge the gap between the different motivations, uniting us again in our precarious secret. The raw honesty hanging in the damp basement air felt both cathartic and dangerous. Motivations laid bare, necessity, escape, rebellion, survival, bound us together in this strange subterranean pact, but also highlighted the fragile threads holding our secret intact. I drew everyone's attention back from the precipice of shared vulnerability with a quiet clap of my hands, the sound sharp in the enclosed space. Okay, I said, my voice low but regaining its focused edge. We're clear on the schedule for the next 2 weeks? No conflicts? Nods all around, eyes meeting mine with renewed seriousness. Good. Remember, I continued, pitching my voice even lower, more urgent. Absolute discretion. Leaving here tonight, stagger your departures. Don't walk together for more than a block. No lingering outside the bar. And getting to and from Nocturne, vary your routes. Be aware of your surroundings always. No mistakes. I looked pointedly at each of them. Text when you get home safe after a shift. Every time. To me, or to the designated person for that night if I'm working late too. We look out for each other. The rule was simple, non-negotiable. And at Nocturne itself, I added, the atmosphere growing heavier still. Remember who you're dealing with. Damien, Gunnar, Lars, they run that place like a well-oiled machine, and they don't tolerate complications. Be professional. Do your job, take the money or the escape you need, and keep your distance. Don't get drawn into conversations. Don't accept unusual offers. Don't give them any reason to pay closer attention to you than necessary. Stay aware. Stay safe. My tone brooked no argument. The inherent dangers of Nocturne itself were a constant undercurrent we navigated carefully. Just as I finished speaking, a soft, rhythmic rapping sounded on the basement door at the top of the stairs. Time was up. A collective intake of breath. A rustle of movement, as everyone gathered their belongings, pulling gloves back on, adjusting scarves. Owen's silhouette appeared as he opened the door partway, peering down at us, his expression predictably impatient. "All right," his low grumble echoed down the stairwell. "Coast is clear out back for now. Let's go. Single file, and quietly." He didn't need to tell us twice. We moved towards the stairs, a silent procession of bundled figures. Owen held the door, watching us ascend the creaking wooden steps, his presence a strange mixture of guard dog and reluctant accomplice. He led us quickly through the cluttered back hallway, past the silent mops and stacked boxes, his heavy footsteps deliberately slow and quiet on the linoleum. He didn't say anything else, maybe just emitted another low grunt that could have been annoyance or perhaps even a grudging sort of encouragement. Hard to tell with Owen. He reached the heavy steel back door, listened for a moment, then cracked it open, peering out into the alley's darkness. He gave a curt nod. "Clear. Go." The rush of biting late January air was a shock after the still, damp coolness of the basement. It felt like plunging into an icy river. One by one, we slipped out into the alley, pulling hoods up, wrapping scarves tighter against the renewed assault of the wind. The contrast was stark, from the secret, shared intimacy of our underground huddle back into the cold, isolating reality of the city night. Snowflakes, thicker now, danced in the weak cones of light from the street lamps at either end, beginning to dust the already grimy pavement and the shoulders of our dark coats. Quick, murmured goodbyes, promises to text, brief reassuring touches on arms. Then, like phantoms, everyone dispersed. May and Talia headed one way together, hoods low. Tommy and Jean turned the opposite direction, moving with brisk, determined strides. Ashlyn and Lily vanished quickly into the shadows towards the nearest subway entrance. Edith and Poppy slipped away almost unnoticed, melting into the darkness. The others followed suit, scattering in different directions within seconds, leaving no trace that 12 dancers had just concluded a clandestine meeting behind a neighborhood bar. I lingered for a second, watching the last figure disappear around the corner. Owen stood by the open door, just watching me. I met his grumpy gaze and offered a small, weary nod of thanks. He just grunted again, a sound that could have meant anything, then stepped back inside, pulling the heavy door shut with a solid final thud. The deadbolt slid home with a loud click, severing the connection, leaving me alone in the cold, snow-swirling alley. The weight of it all settled back onto my shoulders, heavier now, after the shared confessions and anxieties. Relief warred with a profound weariness and the constant thrum of anxiety for the coming weeks. Relying on Owen and Gwen's unwitting generosity felt like another layer of risk added to an already precarious structure. I looked down the alley, now empty except for the swirling snow and the long, dancing shadows. The stark reality of our lives, the immense talent and discipline housed within the hallowed halls of Veridian, juxtaposed against the secret struggles, the financial desperation, the need for escape that drove us to places like Nocturne and basements like this, felt almost unbearable in its complexity. My thoughts drifted again to Giselle, to the tragic story of love, betrayal, madness, and spectral revenge. We danced these epic tragedies on stage, embodying extremes of emotion under the bright lights, but the real dramas, the quiet, grinding pressures, the potentially devastating consequences of discovery, played out here, in the shadows, in hushed meetings, in the cold reality of needing to survive. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the wool scarf rough against my skin. Breathing out, I watched a plume of white vapor dissipate instantly in the freezing air. Time to go home, time to rest, or try to. Tomorrow brought another long day of rehearsals, another day of upholding the facade of Elena Laurent, principal dancer, while carrying the secrets of 11 others, navigating the delicate, dangerous balance of our two worlds. Turning up my collar against the wind and the falling snow, I started the long walk back through the sleeping, snow-dusted city.